Chapter 20, Paris. Within a few hundred yards of the Place de la Concorde, the Rue Saint-Florentin was an elegant houseman-style block with spindly wrought-iron balconies adorning tall, multi-pane windows. Red awnings sheltered the storefront windows of upscale libraries and perfumeries, which alternated with the offices of foreign bureaucracies, including the one on 2 Rue Saint-Florentin. It was the consular section of the U.S. Embassy, and the last place Ambler should show himself. Yet in that seeming recklessness lay the rationale of his decision. After what had happened at the Luxembourg Gardens, there was little doubt in Ambler's mind that consular operations stations here and around the world would be on alert for Tarquin. Paradoxically, it was an anxiety he could exploit. It was partly a matter of knowing what one was looking for, and Ambler did. He knew that the clerical services offered by the consular section at 2 Rue Saint-Florentin were a perfect cover for the Consop station. On the ground floor, hapless tourists with lost passports lined up and filled out forms given out by a clerk who had all the animation of a funeral director. When it came to non-citizens in particular, it would not do to get anyone's hopes up. Visa applications were processed at the pace of a snail with Parkinson's. None of the visitors or regular employees ever thought to wonder what took place on the upper floors, to wonder why they insisted on a separate cleaning service from that employed by the visa and passport processors, and used different exits and entrances. The upper floors, Paris sector Consops, a realm that, as Fenton's new request had proved, had decided that a former HVA known as Tarquin was beyond salvage. He would try to enter the lion's den, but only if he could be certain that the lion had left it. The lion in question was one Keith Lowalski, a corpulent man of 60, who ran the consular operations Paris sector with an iron fist, and a level of paranoia that was more suited to mid-century Moscow than to contemporary Western Europe. The resentment, even scorn, that he inspired among his underlings was a matter of indifference to him. Those to whom he reported viewed him as a solid manager, with a record free of any notable failures. He had risen as far as he had wished to, had never harbored any further ambitions. Ambler knew him only by reputation. But the reputation was a formidable one, and Ambler had no intention of putting it to the test. It was all in Laurel's hands. Had that been a mistake? Was he placing her in jeopardy? Yet he could think of no other means to accomplish what he needed to accomplish. He took a chair at a nearby cafe and glanced at his watch. If Laurel had succeeded, he should see the results at any moment now. And if she failed? A cold fear washed over him. His instructions for her had been detailed, and she had memorized them thoroughly, but she was not a professional. Would she be able to improvise, to deal with the unexpected? If all had gone according to their schedule, she would already have placed a phone call from the American Embassy at 2 Avenue Gabriel. He would have done so himself, but he could not take the chance that the consulate switchboards hadn't been equipped with voice print analyzers. Yet had she been able to do it? They had discussed various scenarios, various pretexts, various eventualities. She was to have presented herself to the public affairs section as the personal assistant of a well-known museum curator, one who was involved in the International Partnerships Among Museums program, and who had dispatched her to retrieve an agenda for an upcoming meeting. The pretext was as simple and vague as that. It had been easy enough to gather enough plausible details from the embassy's website. Ambler was also disorganized to the point of dysfunction. Its staffers were continually tripping over one another's shoes, variously duplicating or dropping administrative tasks. The curator's assistant would have been sent up to the 4th floor, while the apparent error or miscommunication was sorted through. While there, she would have asked to use a private telephone to call her boss and explain the mix-up. Then her instructions were to dial the number he had given her, using the particular argot, A-R-G-O-T, he had prepared her with, and so convey an urgent summons to Keith Lowalski. A State Department dignitary from Washington had arrived at the embassy. A debriefing with Mr. Lowalski was sought immediately. The consulate switchboard would have authenticated the call as originating from the U.S. Embassy. The special words and phrases employed would convey the urgency. Laurel's assignment required little by way of acting, but a great deal by way of precision. Could she do it? Had she done it? Ambler glanced at his watch again, trying not to think of all that could have gone wrong. 5 minutes later, as he watched an aging, obese bureaucrat emerge from 2 Rue St. Florentin with a harried air and get into a limousine, he felt a pulse of relief. She had done it. Could he? As soon as the limousine turned the corner, Ambler strode into the building with an air of someone jaded but resolute. "Passport applications to the left, visa applications to the right," said a bored-looking man in a uniform. He sat at what looked like a schoolroom's chair desk. On it was a cup filled with golf pencils, pre-sharpened, 3.5-inch eraserless pencils. They probably went through a couple of dozen a day. "Official business," Ambler grunted to the uniformed man, who directed him to the back with a brusque nod. Ignoring the lines at the other counters, Ambler walked up to the official inquiries desk. A heavy-set young woman sat at the counter, a pre-printed list of office supplies spread out before her. She was ticking off boxes. "Arnie Cantor around?" Ambler said. "Just a sec," the woman said. He watched her wander back through a door. An efficient-looking young man trotted back to the counter moments later. "You wanted Arnie Cantor?" he asked. Who can I say was asking for him?" Ambler rolled his eyes. "Either he's here or he's not here," he said, exuding a sense of supreme boredom. "Start with that." "He's not here at the moment," the young man said carefully. He wore his hair short, corporate short, not military short, and had the open-faced look that junior clandestine types made a point of cultivating. "Meaning he's in Milan stopping the Principessa?" "No, don't answer that." The young man cracked a smile despite himself. "Never heard her called that," he murmured. He gave Ambler a slightly over-rehearsed look of complete candor. "Maybe I can help you?" "It's above your pay grade, trust me," Ambler replied testily. He glanced at his watch. "Oh, shit, you guys are a complete joke, aren't you?" "I'm sorry?" "Not half as sorry as you're gonna be." "If you'll tell me who you are." "You don't know who I am." "I'm afraid not." "Then the assumption you should make is that you're not supposed to know who I am. You smell to me like you're a couple of weeks out of the incubator. Do yourself a favor. When you're over your head, call for a lifeguard." The incubator, Conzop slang for the special training program that all field agents had to undergo. The young man gave Ambler a crooked smile. "What do you want me to do?" "You've got a couple of choices, don't you? You can get Arnie on the phone. I'll give you Francesca's number if you don't have it. Or you can rustle up one of your desk cowboys upstairs. I'm the bearer of news, comprenez-vous? And the sooner you get me out of the sightlines of the civvies here, the better. In fact, let's go now." He glanced at his watch again, dramatizing his impatience. "Because I really don't have any more time. And if you fuck-ups were on the ball, I wouldn't have had to drag my sorry ass in here in the first place." "But I'll need to see some identification." The request turned into a query. The young agent felt wrong-footed, uncertain. "Man, you are going down for the 3rd time. I got no shortage of identification for 5 different identities. I told you I got dragged in here from the field. You think I got my real papers on me?" Ambler broke off. "Hey, don't let me give you a hard time. I was once standing exactly where you are now, you know that. I remember what it's like. Ambler stepped behind the counter and pressed the button to the accordion-doored elevator a few yards away. You can't go up there by yourself, the young man said. I'm not, Ambler replied breezily. You're coming with me. The young man looked bemused, but followed Ambler inside the elevator. The authority and assurance in the stranger's voice were far more effective than any certificate or form of identification could have been. Ambler pressed the button for the third floor. Despite the antique-looking fixtures, the accordion gate, the leather-clad door with a small window, the machinery itself was new, as Ambler expected. And when the elevator opened again, he stepped into what looked like an entirely different building. Not an unfamiliar one, however. It looked like any number of divisions at the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Rows of desks, flat-screen computers, telephone units. Rows of pails with shredders affixed to their tops, standard State Department protocol after the 1979 takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Most of all, it was the personnel who looked familiar, not as individuals, but as types. White shirts, rep ties, with small adjustments, they could be employees of IBM from the early 60s, the heyday of the American engineer. Ambler quickly scanned the room, identifying the senior-most officer moments before the man, pigeon-chested, wide-hipped, a narrow, priggish face with heavy black eyebrows, hair that flapped over his forehead in a manner that must once have been collegiate cool, rose to his feet. Keith Lowalski's second in command. He had been seated at a corner desk in a room that had no private offices. Ambler did not wait for his approach. You, he called brusquely to the pigeon-chested man. Come over here. We need to talk. The man walked over with a look of perplexity. How long you been stationed here? Ambler demanded. A brief pause before he spoke. Who are you exactly? How long, goddammit? 6 months, he replied cautiously. Ambler spoke to him in a low voice. You get the Tarquin alert. A fractional nod. Then you know who I am, who we are, and you know better than to ask any more questions. You're with the retrieval team? The man spoke in a hushed voice. There was anxiety in his expression and a measure of envy, too. A bureaucrat speaking to a professional assassin. There is no retrieval team, and you never met me. Ambler said, his voice like gravel, even as he assented to the query with a fractional nod of his own. That's how we're going to play it, you understand? Any problems with that? Any problems with us? You take it up with the undersecretary, you got that. Though if you're interested in career longevity, I'd think twice about it. People are putting their asses on the line out there, so you can keep your fat asses on the chairs in here. I lost a man today. If our investigation reveals that you've been slacking on the job, I'm going to be ripshit. And so is everyone in my chain of command. Let me remind you, time is of the essence. The pigeon-chested man extended a hand. I'm Samson. What do you need? It's mop-up at this point, Ambler said. You mean... Target's been eliminated as of 0900 hours. Fast work. Faster than we feared, messier than we'd hoped. I understand. I very much doubt that, Samson. Ambler's voice was imperious, authoritative. We're concerned about your little boat over here. Worried you may have sprung a leak. What? You can't be serious. As a goddamn aneurysm. It's only one possibility, but we have to check it out. Tarquin knew too much. Like I said, it got messy. I'm going to need a secure communications hookup to Washington. I'm talking end-to-end security. No little pink ears pressed to the wall. We should really discuss this with now, goddammit. Then you want the keep, the secure data sphere chamber upstairs, swept every morning, designed for acoustic, visual, and electronic privacy, all according to department specs. I helped write those specs, Ambler said witheringly. Specs are one thing, their execution is another. I guarantee its security personally. I've got a report to transmit, which means I'm going to need to do some fast research too, and let the chips fall where they may. Of course, Sampson said. Ambler gave him a hard look. Let's go. Most major consular buildings contain some version of the keep where intelligence was stored, processed, and transmitted. In the past few decades, U.S. Central Command facilities had become especially important to the projection of American power, the State Department less so, bowing to the ascent of military over diplomatic resources in the post-Cold War conjuncture. That was the world, but it was not the world people like Sampson lived in. They dutifully filed their analytical reports and regarded themselves as in the thick of the action, even though the action had long since passed them by. The secure datasphere was situated behind two separate doors, and the ventilation system was designed to give the chamber a slightly positive pressure relative to the rooms outside, so that one would be immediately aware if either of the doors was opened. The doors themselves were blast-resistant, of thick steel with a rubberized flange that ensured a tight, soundproof seal. Specs called for walls made of alternating layers of fiberglass and concrete. Ambler stepped into the chamber and pressed the button that magnetically clamped the doors closed. For a moment there was silence. The room was unpleasantly hot and dimly lit. Then there was the low sibilance of a ventilation system kicking into gear, and the halogen lighting system blinked on. Ambler was in a space that was approximately 400 square feet. There were two workstations arranged side by side, surfaced with some sort of white laminate, and a pair of task chairs with oval seats and backs, clad in black synthetic fabric. At the workstations were flat panel screens like they had downstairs, and black keyboards. Beige computer towers rested on a rack overhead. By means of a continuous high-speed fiber optic connection, highly encrypted data was exchanged with the digital storage complex in Washington. Remote data facilities like this one were updated, synchronized on an hourly basis. The triple bay configuration held an 84 terabyte storage system equipped with proactive monitoring, along with error detection and correction software. It was also programmed, Ambler knew, with automatic erase features in case of disturbance. Every precaution had been taken to ensure that this vast data storehouse would never end up in the wrong hands. Ambler turned on the monitor and waited a few moments for it to flicker to life. The connection was already live, already on. Now he began to type the keywords of his search. He had brazened his way into the most sensitive place in the Conzop station. His ruse could be exposed at any moment. He was assuming that Lewalski's trip to Avenue Gabriel would take 20 minutes, but if traffic was light, it could be less. He would have to make use of his time wisely. Y. Chun Luang, he typed. A few seconds later, a standard biography appeared, prepared by the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the INR. Underlined hyperlinks led to separate files on the man's parents, their commercial interests, origins, political ties. The appraisal of the parents' business concerns revealed little of interest. Their dealings were not squeaky clean. Friendly assemblymen duly received donations. Minor payoffs to foreign officials in a position to expedite certain transactions were assumed, if not documented, but by the standards of the time and place conducted with a certain measure of probity. Impatiently he scanned the biography of Y. Chan Luang himself, recognizing the familiar points on a familiar public timeline. There was no hint of the allegations that had been in the dossier prepared by the Political Stabilization Unit, and he was well acquainted with the methods of hinting, the techniques of indirection employed by professional intelligence analysts. They typically consisted of tepid disavowals preceded by despite rumors of contacts with, or although some have conjectured that... Yet there was nothing of the sort here. The analysts were mainly interested in how his prospects as a national political figure had been affected by his, quote, determinedly non-belligerent rhetoric, end quote, on the subject of relations with China. Ambler's eyes skittered and bounced from paragraph to paragraph, like a racing coupe on a bumpy mountain road. Occasionally, he paused at passages of potential significance. Wai Chan Wang had great confidence in a future of, quote, convergent liberalization, end quote. He believed that the emergence of a more democratic mainland China would lead to more intimate political relations. His opponents, by contrast, maintained the older, inflexible posture of stalwart hostility and suspicion, a posture that doubtless reinforced the hostility and suspicion rampant among their counterparts in the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. Wai Chan Wang's position on this issue would probably have been politically untenable for any politician who lacked his enormous personal appeal. The words were dry, carefully parsed, but they referred to the idealistic young candidate Ambler had seen, someone who had spoken up for his ideals regardless of political expedience and been respected for it all the more. Kurt Salinger's file was far more cursory. A trade negotiator, he had spent 15 years on economic affairs for Europe under various designations: the European Common Market, the European Community, the European Union. He had been born in 1953 and grew up in Doorn, Belgium, a middle-class suburb of Antwerp. Father, a Lausanne-trained osteopath. Mother, a librarian. There were the usual leftist affiliations from his years in high school and college, spent at the Lyceum Van Doorn, Catholic Universiteit Leuven, but nothing generationally unusual. He had been photographed with a group protesting the deployment of intermediate-range missiles in Germany during the early 80s, had been a signatory of various petitions circulated by Greenpeace types and other environmental activists. But such activism did not survive his 20s. Instead, he had taken to the groves of academe with a certain single-mindedness, working on an economics doctorate with a Professor Lambrecht, something to do with local economies and European integration. Ambler's eyes swept across the dry write-up looking for, well, what? He couldn't be sure, but if there was a pattern to be uncovered, this was the only way to do it. He had to leave himself open and receptive. He would see it, or he would not. Ambler continued to scroll down, skimming a mind-numbing list of the various bureaucratic promotions and preferments that the multilingual Dr. Kurt Salinger had attained. His progress was steady, if unspectacular, but in a field of highly trained technocrats like himself, he had slowly developed a reputation for integrity and intelligence. The next section of Salinger's bio-sketch was headed The East Team. This report concerned his chairmanship of a special committee tasked with East-West trade issues. Ambler read more slowly. The group had been making notable strides in hammering out a special trade accord between Europe and China, an accord that, however, had been derailed by the death of the principal European negotiator, Kurt Salinger. His heart beginning to pound, Ambler keyed in the name of Benoit Deschesnes. He skimmed over the details of Deschesnes's lycée and university training, the fellowships and faculty appointments, the bureaucratic details of the Frenchman's consulting work for the United Nations Monitoring, Verification, and Inspection Commission, and then his rapid rise to the helm of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He found what he was looking for toward the end of the file. Deschesnes had appointed a special commission tasked with investigating charges that the Chinese government had been engaging in nuclear proliferation. Many felt the charges had been made for political purposes. Others worried that there could be fire where smoke had been detected. As Director General of the IAEA, Chestnut had a reputation for rectitude and independence. The State Department's own analysts had concluded, based on its all-source intelligence review, that the report, a year in the making, would exonerate the Chinese government. The latest update, submitted and posted only several hours earlier, stated that the release of the Special Commission's findings would be postponed indefinitely due to the violent death of the principal investigator. China. The orb of the web was centered over China. The word told him everything and nothing. What was crystal clear was that the assassination of Wei Chan-luang did not arise from inadvertence. It was not the result of credulousness toward misinformation spread by his opponents. On the contrary, that misinformation was deliberately made use of. From every indication, Wei Chan-luang's death was part of a pattern, part of a larger effort to eliminate various influential personages who seemed well-disposed toward China's new leadership. But why? More questions, more conclusions. If he had been turned into a cat's paw by cunning and direction, the same technique had no doubt been employed on others. Fenton's very zealotry would make it all the easier for someone to use him. Zealots like him were always in danger of being misdirected when their fanaticism overrode their instinctive wariness. It would be easy to appeal to his patriotism and feed him fake intel, then sit back to watch the results. But again, why? Ambler glanced at his watch. He had already stayed too long. Every passing moment escalated the risks. Before he switched off the monitor, however, he keyed in one final name. 10 long seconds passed as the 84 terabyte array of hard disks whirled futilely before admitting failure. No record for Harrison Ambler found.